There comes a moment in every human life when we realize that the power others hold over us is largely an illusion we've constructed. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the depths of the human psyche, understood this profound truth. Psychological liberation begins when we recognize that external validation cannot define our internal worth. This isn't merely about becoming indifferent to others' opinions. It's about discovering an unshakable foundation of self-worth that renders external criticism powerless. Consider this carefully. When someone's words or actions trigger intense emotional reactions, we're experiencing the activation of what Jung called our shadow. Those aspects of ourselves we've denied, suppressed, or failed to integrate. Today, we embark on a contemplative journey through Jung's revolutionary insights about personal sovereignty, emotional boundaries, and the profound transformation that occurs when we reclaim our psychological autonomy. When others seemingly hurt us, they're often simply illuminating what already exists within our unconscious landscape. The trigger may be external, but the wound is internal. When we feel hurt by someone's criticism, we're often encountering our own self-criticism reflected back through their words. This isn't coincidental. Those who trigger us most intensely are often serving as mirrors, reflecting back the very aspects of ourselves we've refused to acknowledge. This question transforms every conflict into an opportunity for self-discovery. The colleague who appears arrogant might be reflecting your own unacknowledged pride. The friend who seems manipulative might be mirroring your own subtle control strategies. The intensity of our reaction corresponds directly to the degree of truth we unconsciously recognize in their assessment. This understanding shifts the entire dynamic of interpersonal relationships from victimhood to empowerment. The second half of life involves the gradual dissolution of this rigid ego structure, allowing the authentic self to emerge. This process naturally reduces others' power to wound us, because our identity becomes internally generated rather than externally maintained. The conscious response is to investigate the pain itself. What beliefs does this challenge? What fears does this activate? What aspects of myself am I being invited to examine? This process naturally creates boundaries between your authentic self and others' opinions, expectations, and demands. These boundaries aren't built through aggression or withdrawal, but through profound self-knowledge and acceptance. This conscious engagement with pain transforms it from a source of victimization into a catalyst for growth. This means learning to remain open to others while maintaining your center, to be empathetic without losing your identity, to care without carrying others' emotional burdens. They can feel compassion for others' pain without taking responsibility for healing it. They can love deeply while maintaining their individual sovereignty. The shadow, those aspects of ourselves we've deemed unacceptable, must be consciously integrated before we can achieve psychological wholeness. As you develop authentic self-awareness, you inevitably disappoint those who preferred your unconscious, people-pleasing version. This disappointment is not failure, it's evidence of psychological growth. The difficult people in our lives often carry our disowned aggression, selfishness, or weakness. When we reclaim these projections, we discover that others lose their power to destabilize us. Rushing to blame others or immediately seeking comfort prevents the natural healing process from occurring. Conscious suffering allows the wound to teach us what it came to reveal. Pain, Jung suggested, is often the psyche's way of drawing attention to areas requiring integration or healing. Rather, it means recognizing that your emotional response contains valuable information about your own psychological landscape. When you integrate these projected aspects, their power over you dissolves. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Those with overly rigid boundaries may protect themselves from hurt, but also cut themselves off from authentic connection. Jung observed that our deepest wounds often stem not from what others do to us, but from our unconscious agreement to be wounded. The shadow contains our unprocessed pain, our unacknowledged fears, our disowned qualities. This differentiation is initially uncomfortable because it challenges the familiar security of external validation. Imagine your psyche as a vast house with many rooms. Some rooms are well lit, familiar spaces where you feel comfortable and confident. Others remain dark, locked away, filled with experiences you'd rather forget. When someone's behavior triggers you, they're essentially turning on the lights in one of these darkened rooms, revealing contents you've been avoiding. The revolutionary insight here is that your reaction belongs to you. Jung's concept of projection reveals how we unconsciously assign our own disowned traits, emotions, and conflicts to others. Consider how certain people seem to push your buttons effortlessly, while others can say similar things without affecting you at all. Jung encouraged us to ask, what quality am I seeing in this person that I cannot accept in myself? This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior from others. Jung described individuation as the central process of human development, the journey toward psychological wholeness through conscious integration of all aspects of the self. Individuation requires what Jung called the courage to be disliked. The individuating person learns to distinguish between their own thoughts, feelings, and desires, and those they've unconsciously absorbed from family, culture, and society. Jung observed that most people spend their first half of life building an ego, a social mask that helps them navigate external expectations. Jung understood that psychological transformation requires what he called conscious suffering, the willingness to experience difficult emotions without immediately attempting to escape or project them onto others. When someone's words or actions trigger emotional pain, the unconscious response is often to blame them for our suffering. This doesn't mean becoming masochistic or accepting abuse. Rather, it means developing the capacity to sit with difficult emotions long enough to understand their message. Consider how a physical wound requires careful attention to heal properly. Psychological wounds follow similar principles. As individuation progresses, natural boundaries emerge, not as defensive walls, but as clear demarcations between self and other. Jung noted that people with weak boundaries often experience others' emotions as their own, making them vulnerable to manipulation and emotional overwhelm. Healthy psychological boundaries develop through what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. The boundary-mature person can hear criticism without automatically accepting or rejecting it. Jung emphasized that we cannot transcend what we have not first acknowledged. Many people attempt to maintain a positive self-image by projecting their shadow qualities onto others. Shadow integration doesn't mean acting out negative impulses. Rather, it means acknowledging their existence within us and learning to channel them constructively. The person who integrates their shadow anger becomes assertive rather than passive-aggressive. The ego is concerned with image, achievement, and social approval. The self simply is, requiring no external validation for its existence. It doesn't need constant approval because it approves of itself. This inner stability creates what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. The one who owns their shadow selfishness develops healthy self-care rather than martyrdom. We can appreciate others' feedback without being controlled by it. We can love deeply without losing ourselves in the process. They attract healthy relationships because they're not trying to complete themselves through others. They can receive criticism and evaluate its merit without automatically accepting or rejecting it. They understand that others' opinions often reveal more about the speaker than the subject. They contribute meaningfully because they're not focused on what they can extract from situations. When we stop hiding from our limitations, others lose the power to wound us by exposing them. Rather, it creates the safety necessary for genuine intimacy. When we integrate our shadow rather than projecting it, we reduce the collective shadow's power. When we individuate, we give others permission to do the same. It's about becoming so secure in our own worth that we can engage authentically with others without fear of being diminished or destroyed. The person who can acknowledge their weaknesses without shame becomes invulnerable to others' attacks on those same weaknesses. This requires developing what he called active imagination. The ability to consciously engage with our psychological processes rather than being unconsciously driven by them. Every person who achieves psychological sovereignty makes it easier for others to do the same. This conscious inquiry transforms every difficult interaction into an opportunity for growth. Relationships become opportunities for mutual growth rather than sources of validation or threat. This isn't the end of growth, but the beginning of authentic living. Criticism becomes information rather than attack. Conflict becomes invitation for deeper understanding. This recognition evokes compassion rather than defensiveness. You can maintain clear boundaries while remaining open-hearted. It's about becoming whole. Integrating all aspects of yourself so completely that external validation becomes unnecessary and external criticism becomes powerless. This creates space between stimulus and response, allowing for conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. Every individual who refuses to be controlled by others' opinions weakens the collective pattern of seeking external validation. When we're not constantly protecting ourselves from imagined threats, we can engage fully with life's opportunities. Others' words can only hurt you if you give them permission. That permission can be revoked at any moment through conscious choice. When we cease giving others power over our emotional well-being, we discover the vast creative potential that was previously bound up in defensive patterns. When we're not constantly defending ourselves, we can truly listen to others. May these reflections serve as seeds for your own journey toward authentic selfhood and unshakable inner peace. These were all illusions maintained by unconscious agreement. When we're not seeking validation, we can offer authentic presence. The one who acknowledges their mistakes cannot be controlled through guilt. The individual who accepts their humanity cannot be diminished through criticism. You are not at the mercy of others' opinions. You are not damaged by their criticism. You are not diminished by their rejection. Similarly, others' opinions about you are temporary mental formations that cannot touch your core being, unless you give them that power. This connection means that our individual healing contributes to collective healing, and our personal liberation serves the greater good. This isn't because we become arrogant or indifferent, but because our sense of worth becomes internally generated. The self knows its value independent of external recognition. This process requires what Jung called moral courage, the willingness to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. We are both strong and weak, wise and foolish, light and dark. Accepting this complexity makes us less susceptible to others' attempts to diminish us by highlighting our flaws. When we stop needing to be perfect, others' criticisms lose their sting. When we accept our own humanity, we no longer need others' approval to feel worthy. Jung distinguished between the ego, our conscious self-concept, and the self, the deeper, more authentic core of our being. As we develop relationship with our authentic self, others' opinions naturally carry less weight. The authentic self doesn't need to defend itself because it has nothing to prove. It doesn't need to attack others because it feels no threat. People operating from their authentic self naturally inspire respect because they're not desperately seeking it. Jung's insights transform how we understand relationships. Rather than seeing others as potential sources of validation or threat, we begin to recognize them as mirrors reflecting our own psychological processes. This awareness creates space for authentic connection rather than unconscious projection. In conscious relationships, we take responsibility for our own emotional responses while offering others the same freedom. The person who cannot be hurt by others' words has learned to separate information from interpretation. This doesn't create coldness or disconnection. Jung understood that true strength often emerges through embracing vulnerability rather than defending against it. This paradoxical strength develops through what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing truths simultaneously. The vulnerable person who owns their limitations cannot be manipulated through shame. This vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the recognition that our imperfections are part of our humanity rather than evidence of our inadequacy. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious reveals how we all connected through shared, archetypal patterns and universal experiences. When we refuse to be hurt by others' projections, we interrupt the cycle of unconscious wounding that perpetuates human suffering. This understanding transforms personal healing from a selfish pursuit into a service to humanity. The journey toward psychological invulnerability isn't about becoming isolated or indifferent. Jung's insights become transformative only when applied to daily life. When someone's words trigger an emotional response, pause and investigate. What belief is being challenged? What fear is being activated? What aspect of your shadow is being illuminated? Practice distinguishing between your thoughts and your identity. Thoughts arise and pass away, but your essential self remains unchanged. Develop what Jung called objective self-observation, the ability to witness your own psychological processes without immediately identifying with them. When Jung's insights become lived experience rather than intellectual concepts, life transforms fundamentally. The person who cannot be hurt by others' words has achieved what Jung called psychological rebirth, a fundamental shift in identity from ego-driven to self-centered. From this transformed perspective, you recognize that others' attempts to hurt you often reflect their own unhealed wounds. The journey toward psychological invulnerability isn't about becoming perfect or superior. Jung's profound insight that they can't hurt you anymore represents not an end, but a beginning. This liberation doesn't separate us from others. It allows us to love more freely, serve more authentically, and contribute more meaningfully. The invitation is simple yet profound. Recognize that your worth was never dependent on others' approval. Your identity was never threatened by their criticism, and your power was never diminished by their attacks. The moment you withdraw that agreement, you discover what Jung knew to be true. You are already whole, already worthy, already free. Your journey toward psychological sovereignty begins now, in this moment. With this recognition, you are, as Jung understood, a being of infinite worth and unlimited potential, temporarily incarnated in human form to explore the depths of consciousness and the heights of love. They can't hurt you anymore. They never could. The power was always yours. Thank you for joining this exploration of Carl Jung's profound insights into psychological liberation. Remember, your unavailability to others' wounding is not absence from life. It is the fullest possible presence to your own authentic being.